The Jets might have played one of their best games of the season against LA and Pierre-Luc Dubois, showing up in a massive statement win after a somewhat disappointing run of form recently. We'll dive into how the Jets dissected the Kings all on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is free of charge. And, it ensures you never miss another episode. But more than anything, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more and visit FanDuel.com right now because new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started right now. Now, like I said, obviously at the top of the episode, the Jets just came away with what I would call a statement sort of season-defining victory against the LA Kings. And obviously, it's still very early in the season, so I feel like calling it season-defining might not be appropriate, right? Maybe it's a bit of an overstatement. Maybe it's suggesting too much. But this is the kind of game where, after a run of form recently where the Jets weren't actually playing all that well at even strength, Winnipeg needed to kind of remind people why this team has such high expectations this year from the fan base. I think increasingly Jets fans, myself included, have really been kind of pumping the tires of the Jets as a team that's legitimately, on course to start competing for something bigger than just a playoff appearance. Obviously, the team still needs a couple of pieces, and that hasn't changed, but I think you see the makings of something really cool here, and we've seen that multiple times throughout the season. There was the win against the Avs. Then the Jets had, a pretty tightly contested but generally good game against the Canes. It was a little bit lopsided on the shot clock, but honestly, when you look at the actual threat that was created, the game was a little bit closer than it might seem. And at various points, the Jets have shredded, lesser squads. But this recent West Coast trip was kind of like, not great, right? Like the game against the Ducks, the Jets obviously did win, but it wasn't pretty. Even if you lost Kyle Connor, the way that the Jets played against a team that's just not that good was, not exactly inspiring. Then you had the Sharks game, and you're like, yikes, Winnipeg technically did outplay San Jose on the whole, but at very key instances fell short of the mark. And this game against the Kings started off the same way. The Jets had a rough first period, and you can complain all you want about the questionable calls and some of the stuff that Hellebuck maybe would have preferred to not let in, but, on the whole, the Jets just got outplayed. And then the second period hit, and it was like a totally different experience. The Jets were skating, they were competitive, and they started to turn the tide. And what really kind of changed the complexion of this game was the top line. Ehlers-Scheifele and Vilardi have kind of now been united as part of the plan to try and, counterbalance the loss of Connor. And this could not have gone any better. This trio was, in a word, sensational. I think this was probably the best performance from a top line the Jets have had this year. No one has produced as many points as this trio did in one game. They completely and utterly annihilated LA, which is pretty nuts to say, right? Because this Kings team is one of the best in the league. And after a very strong first period from LA, you would have thought, this game was over. But then the fire plug, or I guess fire spark that is Nikolai Ehlers, kind of took the game into his own hands. He's been really good the past few games, hasn't had as many points as I think he's deserved. But this time he got things going. He cut the lead by one on a great wrister thanks to a Vilardi pass. And then just a couple minutes later, Vilardi finds him again on a great feed. Ehlers streaks in right past the defense, goes in alone, and scores again a top shelf beauty that was just, a chef's kiss of a shot. And then, right after that, Mark Scheifele decides, it's time to add my own goal. And thanks to a very hard-working shift where Vilardi and Ehlers and Scheifele all worked, around the slot and below the goal line, they created a third goal that Scheifele was able to shovel in. And after that, the final period was all Winnipeg. The Jets just completely silenced the Kings, really didn't give them any looks. And the only time that LA really threatened was when they finally pulled the goalie and had a 6-on-5. But other than that, right, the Jets basically sucked the life out of the Kings and shut them down, which, considering this was the second half of a back-to-back after a very demoralizing loss to the Sharks, I felt like Winnipeg did a fantastic job of answering my criticisms from the last game in almost perfect form. Like, this 2 periods from Winnipeg these were stupendous periods. This is all I can say. They were fantastic. They showed exactly what I wanted from this team. And what I said in the last episode was, I was irritated because we know that this team can be better and we've seen it. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the Jets team that I think is truly on the path towards a really fun playoff run. And I don't know where it's going to end up. I don't even know if, the Jets are going to make it out of the first couple of rounds. But I can tell you what, if they can actually play like this the rest of the season, if they can have these games where, they really show what it's like to go toe-to-toe with the top contender and come out on the winning side, I think we are in much better straits than a lot of people might have anticipated this year. This team is pretty legit. And what was kind of fun with this game was that it was very much the Gabriel Vilardi revenge tour, right? He had 4 points and a goal. Honestly, this was about as beautiful a breakout as you could possibly expect, with Dubois only notching 1 assist on the evening. Vilardi, I think, actually got a third of Dubois' season point total in one night. So I feel like we've been waiting for Gabriel to break out, to have that signature performance. This was it. He was a maestro. He was perfect. And, with the complementary skills that he brings, his incredible physicality, his strength and balance and hand-eye coordination, he just went off. And wow, I said the Jets won the trade the day it happened, and I still stand by that. I still think, for me, Vilardi is the best player in that deal, and he is showing it in a big way after this game. So let's hope this is kind of the dam breaking for him, because all I can say is, if this is what we have to look forward to for the rest of the season from Vilardi, the Jets are in really good hands. So speaking of Vilardi in the top line, the Jets now actually have something of a dilemma here in a couple of months, because with Kyle O'Connor slated to come back in around 6 to 8 weeks, the Jets might have some legit top line options. We'll talk about which one might be the best choice and how the Jets can take advantage of what could be an elite first-line unit in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Now, as a Ravens fan, this is probably the best time for me to get involved, because obviously the Ravens have been winning a lot. Baltimore is 10-3, pretty darn good team. Maybe you're a Vikings fan, though, and you think you want to try your luck with the Minnesota Vikings football squad that traditionally has been, very Minnesota sportsy, right? But maybe this is the season that they can finally break through and start to string together some good results. Or maybe you're a fan of Tommy Cutlets and you think that this is the season the Giants might finally get themselves back into the playoff conversation. No matter what team you root for, though, the app is super easy to use, and there's tons of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are talking about some of the ramifications of what we're seeing with the Jets, and something that might be of particular fun for Jets fans is Winnipeg's top line and potentially having multiple top line arrangements. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but before we go any further, did want to let you know about something cool that the Locked On Network is doing. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with our local experts and our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, like I said, the Jets might have found that they actually have two first lines, right? And it's not really that they have like two first lines worth of players. It's more like they have two potentially elite combos. We've actually even seen like three elite combos, although the first one, Scheifele-Vilardi and Connor, was very short-lived, right? Thanks to Vilardi getting injured. After we saw Ehlers-Scheifele and Connor really killing their minutes, there was a question of, okay, well, maybe this is the line to go with, right? Is there really any other arrangement that would make sense? Well, guess what? Ehlers, Scheifele, and Vilardi just annihilated the LA Kings, and not only did they win on the stat sheet, they actually scored and got rewarded for it, which is not something that we've seen as much of with some of the other lines. But the Ehlers, Scheifele, and Connor line definitely was racking up some pretty good points. And I think it brings up a really big question, right? What is the best approach here for Winnipeg to have a first line once Connor comes back, right? Where does Connor go? Does he go back on the first line, or might it be time to break him and Scheifele apart? Now, for me, I've always said that splitting 81 and 55 made the most sense, right? Not because they're terrible together. They are defensively not the best pairing for each other. And unless you have the right forward on their flanks, it can be a bit ugly. We all saw what happened when Wheeler used to play up there with them. But you saw how good they are with Ehlers. My thing is I think with the current combo now that we have of Ehlers, Vilardi, and Scheifele, you have a really good mixture of skill sets. You've got an elite transition expert in Ehlers, who also happens to be an absolutely lethal marksman. You've got Vilardi, who is a supremely intelligent player with strong physicality and size and great hand-eye coordination. And you have Scheifele, who's just good at everything that involves scoring, right? They all bounce off of each other brilliantly. They are seemingly developing rapid chemistry, and I feel like they just have the right balance of skill sets and physical traits to match each other ideally. It's, for me, a perfect line, and assuming that it holds together and keeps playing at this level, I really see no reason to break it up. Now, that means Connor is obviously the odd man out, but that doesn't mean that you actually lose out here. I think the second line for me, or what I would like to be the second line if Bones ever gives that line the same amount of ice time, is, a finishing boost, right? If you have Perfetti and Nemesnikov or Buchnevich or Konechny, maybe some of these guys that we could bring in externally, and then you add Connor to that trio or that duo, whoever it is, right? Whether it's Perfetti and Buch or something else, or Perfetti and Konechny, doesn't matter. I don't care. Just pair them together, because I think if you give Perfetti an elite shooter like Connor, somebody who intuitively can find himself in great one-on-one matchups and has the elite finishing talent to capitalize on Perfetti's passing, you're gonna have a heck of a top six. I'm telling you, this Jets team with like one or two trades could become one of the scariest top 9 units to face in the entire NHL. And they really aren't that far away from it. I'm telling you, I think this team with one forward acquisition and a blue line acquisition, suddenly the complexion of how this team matches up is a lot more like 2017, 2018. Will they have like the elite defense that they had back then? No. Will they have a forward core that might actually be even better than that group, though? Yes, they have the potential firepower to really approach what that team was. And I think given how weak the West is, this is probably a really good season to try your luck and see if you can fish out a top 6 forward who can really turn this Jets team from a playoff contender to a cup contender. And will they be a cup favorite? Perhaps not. Not yet. But they might not be as far away from it as you think. So there's a lot to really stew over here. I think the one argument in favor of Connor Scheifele and Ehlers is that they just have, an elite ability to score. And the same things that I said about having Ehlers or Connor with Perfetti probably applies to having Ehlers and Connor together as well. But I just feel like if you know that, Connor or if you know that Ehlers, Scheifele, and Perfetti and Vilardi work together as a top line unit right now, as they are, perhaps it's time to explore where Connor can be moved to. Because if you distribute the finishing talent a little bit more evenly, you might get better results. You might be able to run a second line that might not actually be that different from the first line in effectiveness. Having, a Perfetti, Connor, and Booch or Konechny or whoever, it doesn't even matter down the middle. That's just a trio that could be an absolute treat and give the Jets two really good top lines to match up against opposing units with a great balance of skill sets. So the emergence of Ehlers, Scheifele, and Vilardi really couldn't come at a better time. I think this is an ideal experimenting phase, and so far it is paying off for the Jets in a big way. But let me know what you think of these potential top line combos. Which one do you think is the best? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Now, like I said previously, you've heard me talk about a couple of names that maybe the Jets would acquire externally, and I think it's time to think about it again because you know what? The Jets might be closer to a trade than we think. With the Jets routinely scouting the Flyers, Flyers scouting the Jets, maybe it's time to make something happen. And if the Jets are serious, no one should probably be untouchable for Winnipeg. So we'll dive into who might be on the way out, what trade chips might make the most sense, and how the Jets can really come out of this on the winning end of the equation. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at AG1. Our next partner has a daily nutritional foundational supplement that supports whole body health. I drink it literally every day, and I gave AG1 a try because I was looking for something to boost my immune system and give me a start to the day. Obviously, with all the weird viruses and stuff running around, you've got to have a really strong immune system. And let's be honest, when you're around tons of people, whether you're working in person, you're hitting the gym, whatever it is, you need something that gives you that internal body armor. AG1 is here to help, and it's also super convenient because it's just one scoop in a cup of water every single day. It's a micro habit that's very easy, and it gives you 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, and superfoods to boost all parts of your daily lifestyle, whether it's helping raise your energy levels, strengthening your immune system, giving you a mental boost, whatever it is that you need, it is here to help, and it is super affordable. It costs just $3 a day, which is probably a lot cheaper than that cold brew habit you might be used to. So if a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Just go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out right now. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Jets as we try and parse through some thoughts about, it might be trade time for the Jets. Obviously, Winnipeg is looking for most likely some legit impact players, right? Because Winnipeg is kind of at the stage where a couple of fringe moves don't really move the needle. I would say the Niederreiter trade is probably one of the rare exceptions because he has always been very undervalued. And for what he does and what he brings, he's actually traditionally been exchanged for relative peanuts, even though he's like super good as like an elite third liner. But the Jets kind of need something a little more now. They need to shoot a bit higher. And with Winnipeg kind of having some pretty legit assets to play with, now is probably the time when Winnipeg could arguably make a play for something bigger, right? The Jets obviously have like a good pool of prospects. They've got, some draft assets that they can work with. And obviously the Jets are kind of playing with house money right now. They are okay with like the likely cap space that they'll have by the trade deadline. Although I think for Winnipeg this year, it makes more sense to free up space manually. I think you want to do it before you get too deep into the season because, quite honestly, turning that cap space that you've got into usable players, guys who can bring more offensive value, I think would be the way to go. And, the Jets, they're in pretty good straits, right? Like they've got some ability to accrue space. They're going to try and put off LTIR for Kyle Connor for as long as possible so that they can try and accrue as much space as humanly possible. Every extra dollar really does count. 100K can be a huge difference when it comes to trade deadline figures and unused cap space. So I think the Jets could really make a play for a top player. Now, I've mentioned a couple of the guys that I've really had an interest in. Konechny, I think, is one that makes a lot of sense. We've also talked about maybe Buchnevich. Aside from Buchnevich, the Blues don't really have a lot of other players that I'm very interested in, at least ones that I think Winnipeg would actually be able to acquire. With Buch, he's kind of like at an ideal situation with his contract because he only has one more year after the season. And assuming that Winnipeg would be a team he either doesn't have on his no trade clause or at least would waive it for, he could be a fantastic, medium-term rental. Obviously, you're not expecting him to be here past next season. I think anything beyond the year after that is a little bit of a question, especially because he'll probably need a raise, and I don't know that the Jets could really afford it. But for the time that you have him under contract control, that to me is probably worth a quality prospect. And I hate to say it, but it might be, the kind of situation where you're talking about a Barlow or a Lambert, a McGroarty. I think for me, I'd probably be looking more at Lucius and Lambert or Lucius and Barlow first to move. I still feel that Lambert has among the highest upside in terms of skill, and McGroarty is one of Winnipeg's best overall prospects, period. So I think if you can find a way to package one of the kind of A- prospects with a reasonably good pick, that's the sort of package I could see being more palatable. But the other problem that you have to deal with is that Schmidt would probably need to be a part of this deal. And I don't know if the Blues would really be interested in taking on a little bit of extra salary. The Jets would kind of have to make it worthwhile. And if you start getting into sweeteners, you do have to ask yourself, how much are you really paying for, right? Is it worth it? I think getting Schmidt's money off the books is always going to be worth it because it gives the Jets a lot more flexibility, period, to make other moves. But whether Winnipeg sees it that way, I don't know. The Jets don't really like having to spend a lot of assets to make money move. They've only done it in a handful of scenarios, and this might not be one of them. With Konechny's contract, he's also not really that cheap, and the Flyers are kind of in a weird spot where I don't know if they're going to start tearing it down yet because they're not necessarily totally out of the playoffs, but for my feeling, I think they should probably be thinking more about the future than the present. And, Konechny has a slightly lower cap hit. He has no trade protection. And you could also make a play for, Sean Walker at the same time, who's, an expiring free agent. He's at a reasonable cap hit. He'd be a clear upgrade for Winnipeg's right side defense. I see so many things there that make a lot of sense. It's just if the Flyers would actually be willing to take on salary, that is the big question. Obviously, I think a Barlow or a McGroarty or something is going back, especially because, you've still got term with Konechny and you're also talking about a rental D being thrown in. That's going to be a very expensive package, and the Jets would probably have to pony up. But you know what? I always say that if you're going for gold, if you're really trying to push it, then I will accept moving really top-tier assets that I'm very attached to. Like I said, I'd prefer not to have to touch Lambert or McGroarty yet, but if that's what it takes to get the deal across the tape or across the finish line, and the Jets have no other choice, then you know what? Winnipeg should go for it. This team is too good to let just be as it is. And if Winnipeg is really serious about competing and chasing for, a championship title, then I can live with giving up some of the prospects. That's what you kind of use lottery tickets for. Draft picks and stuff, they are great to have for the future. But if you're good now, sometimes you've got to sacrifice the future to make that run and gamble. Obviously, you have to gamble the right way. And I think the Jets are going to be a little bit cautious. But if they can make a really power move like they did when they brought in Stastny several years ago, I am down for it. So we'll see what the Jets do. Give me your predictions on what assets we might see moved out. Do you think a first or a high second is going? Do you think one of our top prospects is likely to be moved? Drop your predictions in the comments below and let me know who you think is going to be coming back to Winnipeg. For tonight's show, though, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with some more current season coverage and maybe a look at the standings as they are right now. But like I said, that's all the time that we have for today. As always, have a great one. See you tomorrow, and go Jets, go.